Welcome to an episode of Behind the Scenes, a weekly program unveiling the biggest political developments in Somali politics. I'm Sultan Mohammed, your host and co-producer here on HORUFADHI Media alongside Suleiman Hashi. On this week's program, following a crucial election in the Somali capital Mogadishu, the newly elected President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud delivered a keynote speech during his inauguration ceremony that outlined his manifesto and key policies he intends to implement over the next 4 years. What does the Somali slogan Somali Hashish Duniden Hashisla actually mean? That is the topic on the program today. We hope you find this program very informative. Please like, share, and for similar content, do subscribe to HORUFADHI Media. Also, do subscribe to HORUFADHI Media Group's second channel known as HORUFADHI TV, where you can find exclusive programs such as Mahahi Salah, among others. And last but not least, do follow myself, Sultan Mohammed, Suleiman Hashi, Yasin Abdi, and the wider HORUFADHI Media team on our social media platforms that should appear on the screen any moment. Let's get straight into it. So what does Somali Hashish Duniden Hashisla actually mean? Well, before we delve into the policies and concepts that underpin the campaign slogan used by the newly elected president, let's actually define the slogan in English. So in short, and a literal translation of what it actually means is Somalis in agreement with the world. Now, obviously that doesn't make sense. But in other words, if we actually translate the word into proper English, it is finding a resolution amongst each other, that's the Somalis. That is the only way Somalis can reach an understanding and a working relationship with the globe. Indeed, despite the major improvements and steps forward made in the last decade, Somalia still remains a long way away from the reconciliation process being complete, as the issue of Somaliland remains, as well as the lack of cohesion that we've recently seen between Somali federal member states and the Somali federal government. President Hassan Sheikh gave a key speech during his inauguration ceremony, which was critical to understanding what he actually meant by this slogan in a more practical sense. President Hassan Sheikh outlined some of his policies and priorities in his term. So let's take a closer look at some of these points and policies raised by the president. Firstly, President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud defined Somali Hashisha as the extensive reconciliation among the Somali people to resolve their differences. The president praised and commended the development and stability of the Somaliland region, emphasizing the importance of continuing talks with Hargeisa as being a key pillar to its internal reconciliation policy. Indeed, Somaliland has been relatively stable since the early 90s in comparison to the rest of Somalia, of course. The people that reside in the northern Somalia region have managed to develop an entire de facto government with its 3 wings, as well as a somewhat effective security structure that has enabled the Somaliland region to remain somewhat relatively stable over the last 3 decades. However, of course, there remain issues within the Somaliland region, of course, that ought to be resolved, including the recurring political tensions in the Sol, Sanag and Ain region, which sits between Somaliland and Puntland regions of Somalia. And recent protests and police brutality has also demonstrated that peace in Somaliland is fragile and is conditional only on political agreements of all parties involved, rather than the supremacy of an almighty legal system which every individual follows and respects. However, for Hassan Sheikh, the simple idea of finding a common ground with the leadership in Hargeisa on the future relationship between Hargeisa and Mogadishu will be a difficult task alone, as talks have continued to fail over recent years. The first positive step taken by Hassan Sheikh, of course, is highlighting the importance of justice for the people of Somaliland, which feel a sense of injustice and wrongdoing stemming from the civil war era. And this is, of course, true. There's been injustice all over Somalia, and a sense of justice is missing from all over Somalia, not just Somaliland. But the Somaliland region has those issues, and we need to go to Somaliland and have those talks with them. Lastly, the president elaborated that he would take every necessary step to prevent anything that could impede talks between Hargeisa and Mogadishu. Lastly, the president elaborated that he would take every necessary step to prevent anything that could impede talks between Hargeisa and Mogadishu. Now, I absolutely support the president on this matter. However, it is important to have a red line, and that red line being any action that could possibly hinder the unity of the Somali people. There must be an immediate no from the president. Now, moving on to the second element to his Somali Hashish or Somali agreement policy is the federal member states and the federal government relations. Now, following on from the Somaliland question, the president further discussed obtaining political stability amongst federal member states and the federal government, highlighting the importance of consultation, consensus and cooperation between the leadership in accordance with the provisional constitution. This is an important element to seeing Somalia move forward. The biggest issue that faced the Farmaajo administration and the previous initial Mahmoud administration was the cooperation between the federal government and federal member states. Due to the incomplete nature of the federal system, federal member states tend to abuse certain privileges or grey areas to arm twist the federal government into accepting demands. And the best example for people to see this is the 2022 elections/2021 elections, which is a good example of federal member states using their influence to force the federal government to accept demands. Let's take some examples. For instance, Farmaajo shifted from the initial one-person, one-vote policy that he wanted to implement in 2020 to indirect elections by September 2020 due to the demands of Puntland and Jubaland, for instance. Similarly, if we look at the Prime Minister at the time, Mohamed Hussein Roble, he eventually delegated excessive power to regional states during the agreements signed between the federal member states and the Prime Minister in May 2021 due to the pressure to deliver the election, which resulted in federal member states exerting way too much power over the election results in their respective states. And we've seen this during the Senate elections, even in the parliamentary elections, the lower house. And when demands were not met, we saw what happened in 2021, for instance, when leaders of Puntland and Jubaland refused to participate in any talks regarding the election with the then President Mohamed Abdullahi Farmaajo. We also saw this happen when continuous deadlines set by Prime Minister Mohamed Hussein Roble with federal member state leaders were intentionally missed by some federal member state regional governments because they weren't happy with the way the process was going, or they simply just didn't get the results they wanted in their region, so they wanted to change some things to get the results that they wanted because they exerted such power and influence. So consequently, the joint cooperation of federal member states and the federal government is essential to any work to be done, let alone an election, by the federal government. And this includes tackling the droughts that are happening that we see not just in southwest states, not just in Jubaland, but we also see in Galmudug, in Hirshabelle, in Puntland, and in Somaliland. And making use of Somalia's resources in a joint and agreed way to boost our economy overall. Of course, this can only be achieved through political agreements and solutions, which are short-term and unenforceable. The completion of the constitution and the clear allocation of federal state-level powers is the only actual real solution to the recurring internal federal crisis that we continue to see in Somalia. So President Hassan Sheikh has to complete the constitution, or at the bare minimum, actually define the powers that the federal government has and the powers the state level government has, and then have a functioning Supreme Court that then acts as the decider between disputes that might occur between the two different powers of government. Additionally, the president outlined other important policies without citing details, such as bringing local people close to the government by developing district-level governance, which is more effective. Lastly, the president put emphasis on the importance of justice. This is a key element to Somalia's recovery. Indeed, Somalia's continuous suffering from injustice has been going on for far too long. For instance, the establishment of regional mini-clan states following the collapse of the central government in 1991, alongside the heavy reliance on clan elders and militia for justice and security, essentially showcased the lack of trust, if any, people have or had for government at that time. In fact, to this day, some analysts argue and point the finger at the reason why Al-Shabaab still sustains some level of obedience from its subjects that it oppresses is because of this sense of illusion created by them of security and justice that they provide, which some Somalis feel is much better or adequate, so to speak, than what the government provides. Take, for example, recent protests in Mogadishu against the demolition of public property. Some members of the public lost homes and businesses without consultation in any way, which they then accused the government of illegally bulldozing to sell to private businesses. And this is a prime example of such injustice that continues to occur, being done by the federal government or employees of the federal government, which is done at the expense of the Somali people. And for Somalis to come together and trust the government in any way, shape or form, there needs to be an element of justice and, fairness coming from the very government that governs these people. However, recent events have called this all into question, specifically the actions taken by the newly appointed NISA chief, Mahad Salad, and his orders not just to raid the home of his predecessor, which is controversial, but also the raid on the Supreme Court chief, Bashir Yusuf Ahmed, which demonstrates his actions are not compatible, or at least not in compliance, with what the president's campaign has been pushing the last month or so. Now, let's move on to the second element of the president's slogan, which is Somalis in agreement with the world. In his speech, the president explained this would be based on the following points. A, to cooperate with the rest of the world on security, in particular countries in the Horn of Africa. He highlighted the shared security issues faced by Somalia, and neighboring countries in the Horn, including terrorism such as Al-Shabaab and Daesh. Now, the second point he raised was the importance of economic cooperation between regional states being countries, and the utilization of the Somali diaspora business owners to support development and trade in Somalia. The president went on further to highlight that Somalia under his leadership will take a neutral stance in terms of foreign policy, and that Somalia is ready to work with any country that respects Somalia's sovereignty. Now, this is a positive step forward, as it shows President Hassan Sheikh has learnt from his previous tenure and mistakes. For instance, in 2016, he sided with the Gulf states and Saudi Arabia against Iran, which, of course, is in complete opposite to what he's advocating today, which is neutrality. However, many have raised an eye on the eagerness of the president to sign a deal with Kenya. While the Somali government has not directly spoken about it publicly, the Kenyan agricultural minister that was part of the Kenyan President Kenyatta's delegation that arrived to Mogadishu during the inauguration of Hassan Sheikh last week announced to Kenyan media that his delegation reached an agreement with Somalia to allow the flow of Mera back into Somalia, which was essentially banned, or initially, banned by President Farmajo due to political reasons, including Kenya's constant meddling in Somali affairs. While we have not seen the Somali demands in exchange for this market access, I express concern as this is the only leverage Somalia has over Kenya. By losing this leverage, Kenya can essentially exert whatever kind of power it wants in Somalia, and there isn't much the Somali federal government can do in repercussion in return. Additionally, there have been reports today that the Somali ambassador to Kenya, Mahmoud Tarzan, walked out of an event organized by the Kenyan president for foreign ambassadors, which included officials from the secessionist region of Somaliland in northern Somalia. Kenya continues to disrespect, violate Somalia's sovereignty, integrity, and unity under the current administration led by Uhuru Kenyatta. While it may seem innocent in nature, while it might seem an innocent mistake, it really isn't. It's actually a symbolic relevance. It is essentially translating to Kenyatta telling President Hassan Sheikh Mahmoud that the country you think you govern isn't what you think it is. You're not the president of the 18 regions of Somalia. In fact, Somalia is not 18 regions. The entire northern region is not part of Somalia. And that itself is very insulting to the very president that governs this country. So, how Hassan Sheikh responds to the alleged Mera trade deal, how Hassan Sheikh responds to the incident in Nairobi this afternoon will most definitely show us an indication of what to expect over the next 4 years, not just in relationships with Kenya, but also our relationship on the foreign stage with other countries. Obtaining a fair trade deal which benefits Somalia, defending Somali unity against Kenyan aggression, will be vital for Hassan Sheikh Mahmoud to obtain any kind of cross-party support for his new administration, and I wish him well.